Greetings, I'm Richard Rhoda, and today is December 20th, 2018. This interview is part of the Tennessee Board of Regents Oral History Project, and we're here today on the campus of Tennessee Tech University in Cookeville, and our guest now is Dr. Angelo Volpe, former President Emeritus of the university. Angelo?
Hi, Rich.
Thanks
Good
for being
to be
with
here.
us. Great.
Thank you.
Right. So let's begin. Angelo, if you would, a few words about your background and what brought you to Tennessee Tech.
Sure. I grew up in New York City, got my bachelor's degree at Brooklyn College, and then my master's and PhD in chemistry at the University of Maryland. And my first teaching job was up at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. I was there for 11 years, and then went to East Carolina University as chairman of the chemistry department, and then became Dean of Arts and Sciences, then Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. And I just happened to run upon an ad in the Chronicle of Higher Education that Tennessee Tech was looking for a president. And I'd been Vice Chancellor for 4.5 years. And I applied, came for an interview, and lo and behold, got the job in 1987. And I was here as president for 13 years until 2000.
Right, and that was one of the longest runs as a president at the university.
Yeah. When I retired, I think I was the longest serving public university president in Tennessee.
Very good. And those weren't just any 13 years. Those were challenging. We can talk
they
about
certainly
that.
were. You know, the first year I was here, the budget was adequate. And then the second year, the decline began, and it never recovered. So that was one of the challenges of trying to keep everything going, maintain the quality of the university when there just weren't funds available. People would say, what's your long-range plan? And I would say, to survive the next 20 minutes. So it's about the size of it.
Right. So I've told you ahead of time, I'd like to hear your story about your thoughts about the selection process that you became the
right.
the candidate.
Well, the selection process was brutal, Rich. It was like 4 days of nonstop interviews. But I had an ace in the hole. When I came here, one of the other candidates being interviewed was a former president of Clemson University who had gotten fired for all the right reasons at Clemson. He stood up to the board and for academics versus athletics, and he defended the academic area. So I figured there's no way I'm going to get this job. So I might as well just go through for the experience. So I had absolutely no pressure, you know, because I figured there's no way I'm going to get this job. But apparently this gentleman sort of flagged energy-wise during the process. And Chancellor Garland, who was Chancellor for TBR at the time, said, what's it going to take to get you here? I said, well, the salary is good. It was about the same as what I was making at East Carolina. The living conditions are excellent. I said, the only thing that would pose a problem is I'm a tenured professor in the chemistry department at East Carolina University. And if I come, I'd like to come as a tenured professor as well as president. And Tom Garland, to his everlasting credit, he said, you know, I'm a banker. I don't know these kinds of things. Is this the norm? I said, more and more it is. And so he got me tenure in the department, and I came here in '87. And going back to what you were saying, Rich, I was about as rank an outsider as you can possibly get. I'd never even been in Tennessee, let alone Tennessee Tech. And Chancellor Garland told me this story like about 4 or 5 years later, because he told me to me when it happened, I would probably be heading back to North Carolina. But he went to Governor McWhirter, and he said, Governor, we have a new president at Tennessee Tech. His name's Angelo Volpe, and he's from New York City. He said, Governor McWhirter looked at him and said, Garland, are you out of your mind? I said, this guy won't last 5 months. But ironically enough, Governor McWhirter and I became good friends.
Yeah, well, there's one thing about going outside, and then there's going outside. So they
Yes, that's right. And again, to Chancellor Garland's everlasting credit, there was a lot of pressure on him, I think, to get somebody that was part of the Tennessee family. But he says, I'm going to get who I think is the best person for the job.
Well, he did well.
Well, thank you.
Good. So now also back to, so you had been at a state, North Carolina, where universities had their own boards.
Yes.
Correct. So if you could kind of talk about your expectations coming into Tennessee and how that played out.
Well, as you said, Rich, each university in the UNC system had its own resident board, which was the Board of Trustees, and then you had a central Board of Governors, to whom the president of the university for most of my time was William Friday, who was another great person to work for. But when I came here, I didn't realize, as I was going through the interview process, there was no resident board. And I said, God, are you toying with me? I'm not going to have a board looking over my shoulder while I'm here. And that was the case. And the system worked fine because I reported to Chancellor Garland, and Chancellor Garland reported to the Tennessee Board of Regents. And it worked well as far as I was concerned.
Sure. Well, good. And so you came in at a time, and it wasn't just Tennessee Tech, but higher education in the state was having a rough time, and you talked about some of the budget issues.
Right.
Do you remember what were some of the other, issues immediate to Tech that you had?
When I came here, yeah, Rich. The only marching orders that Chancellor Garland gave me when I came here, he said, the only two institutions that don't have chairs of excellence were Tennessee State and Tennessee Tech. He said, Angelo, I want you to get at least one chair of excellence right from the get-go. And we were fortunate enough to be able to get two chairs of excellence, Rich. But not having really money to work with was a big problem. Also, the lack of diversity. Well, when I got here, I was used to East Carolina University. East Carolina had a minority population, mostly African American, of about 15%. And when I came here, I think we had about 2%. I said, my God, where are the African American students? And people said, Angelo, look around, the geography here. There is no population of African American students. I said, well, then we got to go find them. We got to go where they are and get them here. But we never were able to get more than about 5 or 6%, Rich. But one of the things I'm most proud of, though, during the time I was here, we did start a Black Cultural Center, and we did start a Women's Center, which to this day are still ongoing, and they're thriving. So I thought that was something. And then, of course, fundraising was a problem. When I came here, there was absolutely no tradition of fundraising. President Derryberry, who, as you know, served here for 34 years, he was not indifferent to fundraising. He was antagonistic toward fundraising. His feeling was, if you give me money, you're going to tell me how to run my university, and I won't have it. So when I got here, we had about less than $1 million of an endowment. And in the beginning, if somebody would give me $250 for the university, I'd have to put my jacket on, go to their office, and have a picture taken. But fortunately, we were able to. First, we had a campaign in the College of Business, which was successful. We raised about $3 million. And then we got real cocky. We said we're going to have the first university-wide capital campaign. And we hired a consulting firm, and they said there was about $15 million out there. Well, we raised over $23 million.
Oh, wow.
And by the time I retired, we had north of $30 million in our endowment. And I think today it's about $50 million.
Very good. All right. You mentioned Dr. Derryberry and some of the other, I want to ask you specifically about Wallace Prescott. Now, he was, go ahead, you start talking about it.
Okay, Wallace Prescott was the best thing that ever happened to me when I came here, Rich. He was the interim president, because after Derryberry retired in 1974, Aldous Roden was president from 74 to 85. Then he went to THEC as the executive director of THEC, and Wallace Prescott was interim president for 2 years. But I don't consider an interim president. He was president in every way, shape, and form you'd want to think about. And when I came here, Wallace Prescott agreed to stay on for a couple of months. Because, Rich, I was a rookie president. Fortunately, at East Carolina, my chancellor allowed me to take part in a lot of things. So I wasn't just totally green. But Wallace Prescott agreed to stay on. He said he'd stay on for a couple of months. I was able to stretch that to 9 months. And the only problem we ever had with each other, he kept saying, Angelo, I want to leave. I said, Wallace, I don't want you to leave. And he was just a fantastic individual. I mean, he lived for Tennessee Tech. And in many ways, he was probably, maybe after Derryberry, the most important person in the history of Tennessee Tech.
Wow. Well, little known fact, if it's true, I think it is, he was instrumental in setting up when the Board of Regents was getting set up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it worked out. It would have been Derryberry, I guess, who would have signed it, but he put together the original set of looking at the old Board of Education policies that related to higher education and putting them in one place, and then that was the foundation.
Yeah.
So
It was pretty much common knowledge that Wallace Prescott was the only one that understood the funding formula in Tennessee, Rich. And you probably remember this story. When Sam Ingram retired from Middle Tennessee,
yes,
Chancellor Garland appointed Wallace Prescott to be interim president. And you wanted to see an explosion in Murfreesboro. And you mean you had to go, of all places, Cookville, to get us a president at Middle Tennessee State? A month later, those people didn't want to have a search. They said, we love Wallace Prescott. We want to keep him as our permanent president.
well, and he was there for a while.
Yeah, a couple of years, I think. And I mean, that's the kind of person he was. I mean, it took you 5 minutes to realize this was a man of integrity, character, substance.
He was.
Yeah.
Great. So I want to eventually ask you about, you worked for how many different chancellors at the...
Four chancellors.
Four chancellors, kind of what that was about. But I guess a broader question first, just your reflections on the dynamics within Tennessee higher education over the course of your being president, within the Board of Regents, with UT, with TDEC.
Well, with UT being the flagship, I was kind of used to that, being at East Carolina University, Rich. The general feeling was when the budgets came out, Chapel Hill got first dibs, NC State got second dibs, and what was left over, the rest of us got. And it was sort of a little bit like that, with UT being the flagship, and the rest of us would be sort of, that's why I always felt I wanted to keep systems separate, because had we all got into one system, we would again been the stepchildren of the system, in my estimation. Working for four chancellors, I got spoiled. Tom Garland was as good a chancellor as you could have had. Otis Floyd, I just adored Otis Floyd. He was as good a chancellor as you could ever have. And then it went downhill after that. No, not you. Not you. I'm talking about Charles Smith and Manning. I forget his first name. Charles Manning, that's right. Smith, I could never get in step with the way he ran things. And Manning, in my estimation, made me realize you really didn't need a chancellor to run the system. Because, but Otis Floyd and Tom Garland were the best.
Yeah. Well, if we could talk a little bit about Dr. Floyd, because I'm biased, but I think he really is an unsung hero.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
The right person at the place.
And
at the time.
He just did a terrific job as chancellor. In fact, by 1990, when he became chancellor, it was an interesting year. I was the second youngest of the 6 TBR presidents, and that year, Otis Floyd went from TSU to become chancellor. Sam Ingram retired. Ron Bella retired from ETSU, and Tom Carpenter retired from the University of Memphis. So I went from the second youngest to the oldest in 1 year. And whoa.
Through no doing of your own.
I said, how did this happen? But yeah, the dynamics were interesting. And again, it was great having that protection of chancellors that you respected, who were sort of a buffer between the presidents and the Board of Regents. And the Board of Regents, the dynamics there, Rich.
Talk about that.
Yeah, well, you and I have discussed this a lot. When I first came, there were some really quality people on the Board of Regents. But over the years, I don't want to say it got bad, but it wasn't as good there. And we had some people that were on the board that, you really wondered. But then there's always good people, like with THEC, we were talking about Pam Cobain.
Coben, yeah.
Coben. I mean, I would stack her up against some of the best that were here when I first came here. But it did go down a little bit, I thought.
Yep. So as a president,
right,
and don't go there if you don't want to go there, but just the dynamics about who within like the Board of Regents.
Right.
There's this notion that the community colleges, and I guess the TCATs were already part of the system when you came in.
Yeah.
But there was some friction there, and there was some.
I didn't see too much friction between my university and the community colleges. In fact, one of the things I tried to do was get more agreements with the community colleges. And in the beginning, I kind of got blasted by some of the presidents saying, well, where the heck have you been? Fortunately, Paul Sand, who was president of Columbia,
right.
We started out with a little frostiness between us, but then we both realized we were baseball fans, so Paul Sand and I became good friends.
The universal.
Right, exactly. One other interesting situation, Rich, and you may want to delete this, when I did come here as president, one of the presidents of one of the community colleges, I mean, you would think I was Typhoid Mary. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. And, I was befuddled. So I mentioned it to Tom Garland. I said, what is the story? I mean, I hardly know this guy, and it's like he won't give me the time of day. He said, Angelo, he wanted the job. You got the job. I said, but what's that got to do with me? And him, So there was that kind of feeling among some of the community college presidents. And in my opinion, Rich, it's kind of hard to make the leap from being president of a community college to being president of a university. They're different entities. Sherry Hoppy made it, though. I think she was successful in it, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen very often. I didn't feel too much of a friction with the community colleges or the technology centers, what they were called there. There was competition among the universities, though.
Sure.
We were always kind of competing with each other. And I remember I was at one of the meetings early on when Chancellor Garland was still chancellor, and some sticky issue had come up. And in the meeting with the other presidents, I said, boy, isn't it good we've got tenure in a situation like this? And they all looked at me and said, you got tenure. We don't have tenure. And it was a revelation to me. Apparently none of them ever thought to say we want tenure when we came here.
I think you're right.
Right? But over the years, I think they woke up and they kept asking for it, and most of them did get tenure.
Yeah, good. So I want to make sure to get a few more things in before we run out of time.
Right.
But, so you became president emeritus.
Yes.
And that was not automatic. I mean, there's criteria, there are obligations and things.
Right.
So how would you characterize your role as president emeritus?
Well, I think for the most part, Rich, I've done some teaching, but for the most part, I think I'm sort of like when Mickey Mantle retired from the Yankees, and he became an ambassador for the Yankees. That's kind of how I look mainly what my role is. I still have an office on the campus over in the Alumni Center. I do help with fundraising, but for the most part, I think it's really a cheerleader and being an ambassador for the university. And as you know, I was one of the last president emeriti to have that situation where you got a certain percentage of your last year's salary to do that. In fact, Dr. Bell, who succeeded me, was the very last president to have that. That no longer exists, but we are obligated to put in time for the university.
Right. And you're too modest to say this, but I'll say you're one of the charter members of the Board of Elders.
That's right.
Of President Emeritus that helped THEC.
Right. Well,
kept us on the straight and narrow.
Well, THEC had a very good executive director after I retired, Rich. That was you, and it was a pleasure. I think I'm still on the Board of Elders, but there aren't too many of us left.
Yeah. Well, that's another. We'll pursue that on another venue.
Right.
But that was great. So you have stayed engaged in Tennessee Tech things through the Board of Elders and other things. You stayed engaged in at the state level. So since your retirement, there have been a lot of changes at the state level.
Oh yes.
With well, actually, you were part of the before you left the lottery scholarship.
Yes. Yes.
And you're on that task force to set that up, and then Complete College Tennessee Act, some of these other things. So what are your reflections on that?
Yeah, I sort of stumped the state for the lottery, Rich. Steve Cohen, who was in the state legislature at that time.
And now
was in the House of Representatives, representing the Memphis area. But he kind of enlisted me to go about stumping for the lottery. And that was an interesting experience. One other person, I know one of the things you want to talk about, who were people that really made an impression, Senator Tommy Burks in the state legislature. He and I probably disagreed on 98% of things politically. In fact, I used to always kid him. I said, Senator, you're a Democrat here in Tennessee. In New Jersey and New York, you would be a rock rib Republican. But we had a common ground. He loved Tennessee Tech as much as I loved Tennessee Tech. And we became really fast friends. And one time I was in his office, and he had a picture on his wall. I think it was of Andrew Jackson. I said, boy, that's a nice picture. He said, I said, where'd you get it? He said, Steve Cohen gave it to him. I said, well, Senator, you ought to reciprocate by supporting the lottery, which he was dead set against, with Senator Cohen. He says, boy, you Catholics, all you want is your bingo and your lottery, don't you? But we had that kind of a relationship, and when, unfortunately, he died, Mrs. Burke asked me and Governor McWhirter to deliver the eulogies. And the only place we could have the funeral service was in the agricultural pavilion, which I thought was entirely appropriate. It was the only place big enough. And Governor McWhirter and I were sitting in the middle of the arena there by ourselves. And Governor McWhirter turned to me. He said, you and Tommy Burks were the oddest couple as friends I've ever seen. A small town farmer from Tennessee and a kid from Brooklyn, New York. And yet, Rich, we were great friends. And it really struck home to me when we were going from the Ag Pavilion to the cemetery. People were lined 2 and 3 deep along the whole route. And Tommy Burks, I mean, he to me, epitomized what a politician would be. There was none of this, which way's the wind blowing?
Right.
When he made up his mind was, here I stand, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good. So the lottery, that in itself was a success.
Oh,
and
yes.
The scholarship, designing the scholarship was an exercise. I mean, it was, and it's
right. And it was interesting going around, giving talks, Rich, and talking to people, and answering their questions. They would say, we don't want a lottery. And I would say, sometimes women, sometimes a man, I'd say, ma'am, we already have a lottery. Except it's in Kentucky and it's in Georgia. I mean, if we were isolated and there was no way, I said, but we're losing money to these other states. And to my knowledge, Rich, I don't know of anyone who was against the lottery who has turned down a scholarship for anybody in their family from the lottery.
Yeah, it's like the private college presidents that opposed the lottery, but when it passed, they sure wanted their students to participate in the scholarship program.
That's right.
Good. So then the other changes that went on after you were with the Complete College Tennessee Act and some of those other things.
Yeah,
what are your...
I wasn't really that much directly involved in those, so it was from a distance, Rich, but I was able to see the impact on the universities from Tennessee Promise and free tuition to the community colleges and the TCATs. And you know that's had to affect the universities adversely. And there was always the comment that, well, students will go to the community colleges and then they'll transfer to the universities. But I don't see that happening on any large scale, Rich. I can see students going to the community colleges, getting their associate's degree, getting a decent job, and saying, well, I don't think I'm going to go on to college, at university.
Yeah. Very good. So you said that made me think. So you also had I would say a remarkable, in a good sense, relationship with the TCAT presidents, or at that time they were called Technology Center Directors.
Oh, yes, yes.
And one in particular.
Yeah, Ralph Robbins at Livingston, which was our closest one. We became good friends right off the bat. He probably told you this story. It was at my first Board of Regents meeting, and it was one of the few where Governor McWhirter attended. And we had something on the agenda, something minor. And before it got to that item, I got called out for a phone call. And when I got back, Robbins said, Governor McWhirter said, since you didn't care enough for this item on the agenda, we're just going to skip it. And Ralph likes to make fun of my Brooklyn accent. He says, then I turned to him and said, Ralph, what should I do? And he said, if I were you, I'd get up and get Governor McWhirter's attention. And as I'm getting up, he pulls me by my pants. He says, I'm just kidding. They just passed that while you were out. I wanted to kill him, but we became good friends.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah. But no, I remember always appreciating the fact that there really was this kind of snobbery, reverse snobbery dynamic that was unnecessary.
Yeah.
And you certainly corrected
And you know,
that.
those folks were doing a good job in their environment, and I couldn't see it. I didn't see us as universities, community colleges, TCAT. We were all in it together.
Yeah. So one last, our parting conversation. So now, yet another fundamental change, significant change
Yes.
in the governance structure with the Focus Act 2
Right.
years ago being implemented now.
Yeah.
So there are no universities under the Board of Regents. They
Right.
all have local boards.
Yeah, we've come full circle now. We're having
Yeah, welcome back to North
resident
Carolina.
boards. And I tell folks, you know, it's a lot more complex being a president than when I was here, Rich. You've got more folks that you are beholden to now, a resident board, for example. And I think it's going to be harder that there isn't that umbrella anymore, and each institution is going to have to sort of jockey for position. And so when folks say, well, I got this complaint and that complaint, I say, well, you know, it's harder governing a university now than it was when I was here.
Yeah, more moving parts. And
More moving parts,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. So the notion, though, that the universities now will be less restrained, be more entrepreneurial, I guess we'll have
I
to see.
think so, and I think a lot is going to depend on the makeup of these boards. You know, when it came about, folks said, what's your thought? I said, it's got a lot of potential. If it's going to be growing pains because all of these people are rookies
Yeah.
and they're going to have to grow into it. And if they do, I think it'll be a good thing. If they don't, I think it's going to be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So it still remains to be seen. I think the jury's out on a lot of
And growing
cases.
pains is a good way to look at it
Yeah.
because it just would not have been,
Right.
makes sense that they're right out of the chute.
Yeah.
And they're, learning new rules of engagement, how the boards interact with one
Right,
another.
exactly.
Well, good. Well, our time is about up, sir.
Right.
This has been a great, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Rich. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Good being with you.
Same here.
Right.